Imagine this. In the mid-2000s, you hear an Israeli leader call the Iranian president a Persian version of Hitler. Pretty strong words, right?
Absolutely striking language.
But here's the real kicker. That very same Israeli leader, maybe 20 years earlier, was urging President Reagan to build a, quote, broader strategic relationship with Iran.
Wow.
How on earth can those two things exist? Same person, same countries.
It's an incredible juxtaposition, isn't it? And it immediately signals that the public story, the one we usually get fed, well, it's rarely the whole story.
Right.
There's almost always something deeper, more pragmatic going on underneath.
And that disconnect you just hit on, between the public face and the backroom deals, that's exactly the maze we're diving into today. Welcome to the deep dive.
Glad to be here.
We're plunging headfirst into a really thoroughly researched book, Treacherous Alliance, The Secret Dealings of Israel, Iran, and the United States by Trita Parsi. And look, this isn't just history for history's sake.
No, it's much more than that.
It's a deep look at how these three nations, often painted as, mortal enemies, have actually had this incredibly intertwined, often secret relationship. And it's driven far more by cold strategy than public ideology.
And you're going to discover just how this underlying Israel-Iran dynamic has quietly shaped the Middle East for decades. We'll explore why the public shouting often hides these really complex deals and how making assumptions about who your enemy is can lead to some, well, pretty dangerous mistakes.
Get ready for some serious aha moments because we're kicking off right back in the Cold War era.
Let's do it.
Okay, so let's set the scene. Early years, say 1948 up to the early 90s, both Iran under the Shah and the new state of Israel found themselves facing similar threats, right? What were these shared fears that pushed them together?
Well, the big picture concern was definitely the spread of Soviet influence. That was huge.
Right, Cold War backdrop.
Exactly. And then you had these radical pro-Soviet Arab states popping up, and particularly Gamal Abdel Nasser in Egypt. His pan-Arab anti-Western stance was a major worry for both.
Okay, so Nasser was a key figure here.
Definitely. Iran, specifically, felt kind of encircled by Arab nations.
Yeah.
They were really concerned about pan-Arab expansionism, especially Arab claims over their oil-rich province, Khuzestan.
So Iran's feeling vulnerable. What was Israel's play in this situation? What solution did they come up with?
Israel developed what they called the periphery doctrine. It was a pretty clever strategy, actually.
Okay.
They decided to seek out non-Arab allies, think Turkey, Ethiopia, and yes, Iran, basically anyone on the edges of the Arab world. The goal was to strategically weaken that Arab bloc and, give both themselves and their new allies some breathing room.
So an alliance really born out of necessity, out of shared threats.
Precisely.
And how deep did this secret friendship actually run? Was it just talk or was there real substance? Military training, intelligence?
Oh, it went incredibly deep, much deeper than most people realize. Despite all the public sensitivities, Israel and Iran built up these really clandestine ties.
But like what specifically?
We're talking about Iranian military officers, even the Shah's notorious secret police, Savak.
Savak.
Yes, they received secret training from Mossad, Israel's intelligence agency. This happened both in Iran and in Israel. And it wasn't just basic stuff. It included things like advanced interrogation, even torture techniques.
Wow. That's a serious level of cooperation, especially considering where things ended up. What about other support, military hardware?
Absolutely. Beyond the intelligence side, Israel trained hundreds of Iranian personnel, about 400 pilots, paratroopers, artillery guys, and they sold Iran advanced high-tech military equipment. It was a very solid, though obviously hidden, military partnership.
And this cooperation extended into covert operations too, right? I remember reading about Iraq and the Kurds.
Yes, that's another layer. Israel wanted to weaken Iraq, which they saw as a major threat, so they started backing Mullah Mustafa Barzani, a Kurdish guerrilla leader fighting Baghdad.
How did Iran fit into that? They had their own Kurdish population. That must have made them nervous.
It did, initially. Iran was hesitant. They suspected Barzani might have communist links, plus they worried about, blowback with their own Kurdish minority.
Understandable.
But eventually, the strategic logic won out, and they joined forces with Israel in supporting the Kurds. And interestingly, the U.S. chipped in with some limited clandestine support, too.
So you actually had Israeli and Iranian military units working together.
Deployed together in Iraqi Kurdistan, yes.
Yeah.
Training and commanding Kurdish fighters.
Yeah.
It's quite remarkable when you think about it.
But this secret arrangement, it didn't last forever. Things started to shift in the mid-70s. What happened? Why did Iran become less dependent on Israel?
Money, basically. Oil money.
Ah, the oil boom.
Exactly. By the mid-70s, Iran was flush with cash from oil revenues. This made them much less reliant on Israel financially and militarily. The Shah started feeling more confident, dreaming of Iran as the dominant regional power.
And this led to what the book calls a betrayal.
Yes. In 1975, the Shah, completely out of the blue, signed the Algiers Accord with Iraq.
With Iraq, his rival.
The very same. And this deal unilaterally ended Iran's support for that Kurdish insurgency they'd been backing with Israel.
Wow. Why?
It showed the Shah was ditching the old balance of power logic. He wasn't trying to just contain Iraq anymore. He was trying to eliminate Iraq as a rival to clear the path for Iranian leadership. He wanted Arab recognition, and cutting the Kurds loose was part of the price.
That must have sent shockwaves. How did Israel and the U.S. react? They weren't consulted?
Not at all. Blindsided completely. It seriously damaged Israel's standing in Tehran and ramped up their fears of becoming, well, strategically disposable. Even senior Iranian officials were apparently surprised by the move. It showed Iran was now prioritizing its own national ambitions above all else.
And then just a few years later, 1979, the Iranian Revolution. Everything changes. What was the immediate impact on that Israel-Iran relationship?
Immediate and total severance. Ayatollah Khomeini's return meant an abrupt end. All ties, oil sales, flights, everything cut off. Just like that.
And the new regime defined itself against the Shah.
Fundamentally. And that included his close ties with Israel. For the revolutionaries, Israel represented different things.
Oh, so?
Well, for the leftist factions, Israel was seen as basically an outpost of American imperialism in the region.
Yeah.
For the religious forces, the condemnation was deeper. Israel was an illegitimate state, a usurper of Muslim land. Khomeini himself famously called Israel a cancer that needed to be removed. It was a complete ideological reversal.
So how did this new revolutionary Iran approach the Palestinian issue? Because Arafat and the PLO visited Tehran early on, right?
They did visit, yes. But Khomeini very quickly put distance between his regime and the PLO's more nationalist leftist approach.
Why the shift?
Khomeini insisted on an Islamic orientation for the Palestinian cause. This was critical. If it was just an Arab nationalist struggle, then Iran, being Persian, couldn't really claim a leading role.
Oh, I see.
But by framing it as an Islamic cause, a struggle for all Muslims, Iran could justify its own leadership aspirations on the issue. It was a strategic redefinition.
Then the 80s roll in, bringing the horrific Iran-Iraq War, and Iran adopts this incredibly complex double policy. How does a revolutionary, now isolated state manage that kind of strategic contradiction?
It was an absolutely brutal time for Iran. They were largely isolated. Saudi Arabia, the Gulf states, they were pouring money into Iraq.
Right.
Iraq's military ballooned, these chemical weapons, often with Western parts, and disturbingly, the book notes, with U.S. knowledge, Iran was desperate.
So facing this existential threat, what was the double policy?
It was essentially a survival strategy, a multi-layered approach. On one level, Iran secretly kept collaborating with Israel on security matters, mainly arms supplies.
Secretly, while publicly
ramping up the anti-Israel rhetoric to extreme levels. It seems completely contradictory, right?
Totally. How did they square that circle?
It was a pragmatic compromise. They needed to balance their long-term security needs. Remember, there's still a non-Arab state in an Arab region, and their ambitions for regional leadership with the demands of revolutionary ideological purity.
So the harsh anti-Israel talk was partly performative.
Calculated, certainly. It was designed to counter Arab threats, gain sympathy on the Arab street, and make it politically harder for Arab governments to openly back Saddam Hussein's Iraq.
So less about pure ideology at that moment and more about strategic survival. Even Khomeini showed some pragmatism here.
He did, surprisingly. He laid out a very clear hierarchy for the Palestinian issue. First, it was a Palestinian problem. Second, an Arab problem. And only third, an Iranian problem.
Interesting.
And critically, he stated Iran should never get more involved than the Palestinians themselves, and direct fighting was their responsibility. This pragmatic framing created space for those secret dealings.
And what was Israel's view during the war? Their former secret partner is now this revolutionary state fighting Iraq.
Well, paradoxically, throughout the 80s, Israel didn't really see revolutionary Iran as its main threat. No. An Iraqi victory was viewed as the existential danger of a much stronger Eastern front against Israel. An Iranian victory, while not ideal, was seen as less concerning, partly because Iran was further away geographically.
Which explains the arms sales.
Exactly. That's why Israel sold Iran over $500 million worth of weapons between 1980 and 83, mostly paid for with Iranian oil.
And the U.S. knew.
The U.S. was aware, yes, and largely looked the other way. It really underscores the treacherous alliance idea, these secret dealings continuing even amid public hostility and war.
Which brings us right to the Iran-Contra affair in 85-86. This blew the lid off some of it.
It certainly did. Iran was desperate for specific U.S. weapons, particularly anti-tank missiles. They even tried reaching out to the U.S. directly.
Wow.
They intervened to help get some American hostages released, hostages being held by Hezbollah in Lebanon, as a kind of goodwill gesture.
But the direct approach failed.
It did, and Iranian intermediaries were apparently told the only way to get the U.S. weapons they needed was, believe it or not, through Israel.
Through Israel again. And Israel saw an opportunity.
Israel saw a chance to prove its strategic value to the U.S. They offered to supply the missiles to Iran if the U.S. would then replenish Israel's own stockpiles.
The famous arms for hostages deal.
That's the one. President Reagan approved it. Missiles flowed to Iran. American hostages were released.
But here's the really fascinating part from the book. For Iran, the real goal wasn't reconnecting with Israel. It was about reestablishing ties with Washington.
Absolutely.
So they're dealing with Israel in secret while blasting them in public speeches that double policy and action. And Israel, they justified it by saying they were trying to moderate Iran.
The layers of strategic maneuvering, misdirection, and hidden agendas are just incredible.
Okay, so that tangled web brings us towards another major shift. The end of the Cold War and the rise of the U.S. as the sole superpower.
Yes, the unipolar era.
Yeah.
The 1991 Gulf War, where Iraq was decisively defeated, combined with the Soviet Union's collapse. It completely redrew the map of the Middle East.
And those common threats that had kind of forced Israel and Iran together.
They just evaporated. Poof. Gone.
And suddenly, who are the two strongest players left standing in the region?
Iran and Israel. No longer reluctant partners against common enemies, but now emerging as the primary rival.
Rivals vying to shape the future of the region. How did Israel perceive this new reality, especially with Iraq, weakened?
Israel became deeply concerned. Without Saddam's Iraq acting as a counterweight to Iran, they feared Tehran could become an unchecked regional hegemon. The entire strategic calculus flipped.
What about Iran in this post-Gulf War period? They adopted a policy of positive neutrality, right?
They did. They opposed Saddam's invasion of Kuwait, but they stayed out of the U.S.-led coalition to liberate it. In effect, it was quite a pro-American stance, strategically speaking.
Did they try to leverage this? Build bridges?
They made gestures, tried to mend fences with Arab neighbors, helped get more American hostages released in Lebanon. But Washington just didn't bite. There was no real reciprocation.
And Iran was particularly angry about being left out of the Madrid Peace Conference in '91.
Very bitter. They saw Madrid as the place where the new Middle East order was being designed, and they weren't even invited to the table.
So they ramped up the anti-Israel rhetoric again.
They did. But it's telling, as the book points out, that even then, there were no major Iranian-backed terror attacks reported against Israel around that specific time. Suggests the rhetoric was still partly strategic positioning, which leads us into Israel's next big strategic move, what Parsi calls trading enemies.
Okay, what does that mean?
Well, domestically in Israel, things were changing. People were tired of the first intifada. There was a desire for peace. This brought the Labor Party Yitzhak Rabin, Shimon Peres to power in 1992, replacing Likud.
And their new strategy toward
It
Iran.
was two-pronged. Prong one, make peace with the PLO, who were weakened after the Gulf War. Prong two, simultaneously paint Iran as the new, overarching threat to regional stability and even global security.
Why pivot so hard towards Iran as the enemy?
It was about maintaining Israel's strategic importance to the United States in the post-Cold War world. With the Soviet threat gone, they needed a new rationale for that close U.S.-Israel security relationship.
So frame Iran as enemy number one.
Exactly. Rabin's advisors actively lobbied the incoming Clinton administration, arguing Iran wasn't just Israel's problem, but a danger to the entire West.
And this influenced U.S. policy.
Directly. It led to the Clinton administration adopting the dual containment strategy, targeting both Iran and Iraq.
Containing both at the same time. Did people think that would work?
Critics were skeptical. Some called it nutty, arguing it was counterproductive. You risk pushing Iran and Iraq together if you target them both simultaneously, which is the opposite of what you want.
So while Washington is adopting dual containment influenced by Israel's framing of Iran, something else huge is happening in secret.
The Oslo Accords. Secret talks between Israel and the PLO led to that breakthrough agreement in 1993.
How did Iran react to Oslo?
Very negatively, harshly. They saw it as a direct threat to their own regional influence and standing.
Why a threat?
They feared being totally isolated. If the Arab states made peace with Israel, Iran worried it would lead to an Israeli-dominated regional order, effectively sidelining Tehran.
So what did they do?
They doubled down on the anti-Israel rhetoric, offered support to Palestinian groups opposed to Oslo, like Hamas and Islamic Jihad. The aim was to undermine those Arab governments seen as going soft on Israel by appealing to the Arab street.
And Israel used this opposition, linking Iran to terror attacks, like the bombings in Buenos Aires.
Yes, the Israeli embassy bombing in '92 and the AMIA Jewish Community Center bombing in '94. The book acknowledges there was likely some Iranian involvement, but suggests Israel significantly exaggerated the Iranian role and threat level.
Exaggerated it for strategic reasons.
The argument is, yes, to sabotage any chance of U.S.-Iran rapprochement, push Washington towards tougher action against Iran, and maybe scare Arab states away from Tehran, too, using the terror narrative as a tool.
This anti-Iran push also manifested in sanctions, right? The Conoco deal.
Absolutely. When Iran's then-President Rafsanjani tried to improve economic ties, specifically a major oil deal with the American company Conoco, there was intense lobbying against it in Washington.
Lobbying by?
Primarily by pro-Israel groups like AIPAC. This pressure ultimately led to the Iran-Libya Sanctions Act, or ILSAGA, which aimed to punish foreign companies investing in Iran's energy sector.
But here's the hypocrisy again. While pushing the U.S. for harsh sanctions.
Israel itself was still quietly trading with Iran.
Still, even then.
Yes, through third countries.
Mm-hmm.
Things like Iranian pistachios, chemicals, maybe even some military-related items. It caused real irritation in Washington, this apparent double standard. Strategy and profit trumping the public stance, yet again.
Then, in 1996, Benjamin Netanyahu comes back to power with Likud. Did he continue this intense focus on Iran as the primary threat?
Actually, no. It's one of the counterintuitive twists. Netanyahu's government was apparently more open to intelligence assessments, suggesting that maybe, just maybe, weakened Iraq still posed a bigger conventional threat than Iran did at that moment.
So a different perspective from Likud.
A slightly different calibration. Netanyahu seemed to subtly try and lower the temperature with Iran. There were reports of attempts at indirect communication, using intermediaries, prominent Iranian Jews, European think tanks, even mediators from Kazakhstan and Russia.
Why would Netanyahu do that?
His rationale, according to Parsi, was rooted in his deep skepticism about the Oslo peace process with the Palestinians. He didn't really believe it would work.
Okay.
So he felt Israel's long-term security still relied on cultivating non-Arab allies, a return to that old periphery doctrine. He wanted to keep the Iran option, however remote, alive, precisely because he didn't trust Arafat and the Palestinian leadership.
Fascinating. But that interlude was relatively brief. Then came Mohammad Khatami's election in Iran in 1997, a reformist president.
Yes, Khatami's win signaled a real shift, at least rhetorically. A move towards pragmatism, improving ties with Arab neighbors, and a generally less hostile tone towards the outside world, including softening the stance on Israel somewhat. Iran felt less need to play the Arab street card so aggressively.
How did the U.S. react to Khatami?
The Clinton administration was intrigued. They expressed interest in dialogue. Some even saw Khatami as a potential Iranian Gorbachev, someone who could reform the system from within.
What obstacles remained?
Huge ones. The existing U.S. sanctions were still in place. The pro-Israel lobby remained very influential in Washington, opposing any easing of pressure on Tehran.
And Israel's reaction to Khatami? Still skeptical.
Largely, yes. Israel kept sounding the alarm, particularly about Iran's developing missile programs. Although the book notes some within the Clinton team suspected this focus on missiles was partly a way for Israel to distract from the fact that the peace process with the Palestinians was stalling badly.
Meanwhile, Iran itself was sending some nuanced signals.
They were. Officials, sometimes privately, sometimes even publicly, would clarify things. They'd say their missile buildup wasn't aimed at Israel specifically, but was for regional deterrence. And crucially, they hinted Iran could accept a two-state solution for Israel and Palestine, quote, if acceptable to the Palestinian people.
That's a significant qualifier, but still a far cry from destroy Israel.
It showed a pragmatic streak beneath the revolutionary rhetoric. At the same time, Iran's ties with Hezbollah in Lebanon were deepening. Hezbollah became Iran's powerful long arm in the region.
A deterrent against Israel.
An effective one. It gave Iran a real influence over the Israeli-Palestinian situation. When Israel withdrew from southern Lebanon in 2000, it removed the burden of occupation, but it also solidified Hezbollah's position, arguably enhancing Iran's proxy capability.
Then came 9/11, a moment that changed everything, and surprisingly led to some quiet U.S.-Iran cooperation.
Very surprising, but yes, in the immediate aftermath, facing the common enemy of the Taliban and al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, Iran provided significant quiet assistance to the U.S.
Okay.
Access to air bases, crucial intelligence sharing, search and rescue support, and help bridging connections with the Northern Alliance who were fighting the Taliban on the ground. It was substantial cooperation.
But this fragile behind-the-scenes cooperation didn't last. What derailed it? The Karina incident in 2002.
That was the nail in the coffin for that brief opening. Israel intercepted a ship, the Karine, loaded with weapons.
Iranian weapons.
Yes, Iranian-produced weapons apparently destined for the Palestinian Authority under Arafat. Israel presented this as the smoking gun, definitive proof of Iran's deep involvement in terrorism against Israel.
And this had immediate consequences in Washington.
Huge consequences. Regardless of the full context or nuances, the timing was perfect for hardliners. It effectively killed any chance of continued U.S.-Iran dialogue that might have emerged from the Afghan cooperation.
And it fed directly into the axis of evil speech.
Directly. President George W. Bush lumped Iran in with Iraq and North Korea in his 2002 State of the Union. The Karine A incident provided powerful ammunition for that. It was a massive blow to Khatami's reformist camp in Iran, and conversely, a huge vindication for the Iranian hardliners who had always preached mistrust of the U.S.
Then in 2003, with the U.S. invasion of Iraq underway, Iran gets really worried about being next. They fear encirclement.
Understandably so.
And they send this confidential grand bargain proposal through the Swiss ambassador. This sounds like a potentially game-changing moment. What was Iran offering?
It was truly unprecedented, a comprehensive package deal. On the table was ending support for Palestinian militant groups like Hamas and Islamic Jihad.
Wow. What else?
Supporting the disarmament of Hezbollah, helping it transform into just a political party in Lebanon. Full transparency on their nuclear program, offering to sign the additional protocol, even allow direct U.S. involvement, full cooperation against al-Qaeda. It was huge.
And the most stunning part, accepting the Beirut Declaration. What did that imply regarding Israel?
Accepting the Beirut Declaration, which was an Arab League initiative, meant implicitly accepting a two-state solution. It meant, in effect, offering a pathway to peace with Israel. This was revolutionary Iran offering a comprehensive settlement.
An incredible offer. How did the Bush administration respond? Did they jump at the chance?
No, it was rejected, summarily rejected.
Rejected, why?
Despite some support for engagement within the State Department, the hardliners, people like Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld, vetoed it.
Yeah.
The reported rationale was chillingly simple. We don't speak to evil.
We don't speak to evil, just dismissed it out of hand.
The book calls it sheer hubris. A conviction that the U.S. was so powerful after invading Iraq that they didn't need to negotiate. They could just dictate terms or achieve regime change. It was a devastating blow to the moderates in Iran who'd pushed for this opening.
A potentially massive missed opportunity to reshape the entire region.
Arguably, yes. And at the same time this offer was being rejected, other forces in Washington, neoconservatives and pro-Israel groups, were actively pushing for regime change in Iran, lobbying for millions in U.S. funding for Iranian opposition groups, using the same playbook that had helped pave the way for the Iraq War. This just further poisoned the well.
So the policy remained containment, leaning towards confrontation. And the limits of that approach became pretty clear in the 2006 Lebanon War.
Very clear. Israel had apparently done extensive planning for a major conflict with Hezbollah.
What was their strategic goal in targeting Hezbollah so heavily?
It wasn't just about Lebanon. It was aimed squarely at Iran. The idea was to cripple Iran's main proxy, its first line of defense. The message was, if we can devastate Beirut, we can devastate Tehran. It was about reestablishing deterrence against Iran itself.
But the war didn't go according to plan for Israel.
Not at all. Hezbollah put up a much tougher fight than expected. Thousands of rockets hit Israel, and crucially, they hit an Israeli warship with a sophisticated anti-ship missile, reportedly Chinese-made, likely supplied via Iran. It was a shock.
So the war intended to weaken Iran and boost Israeli deterrence.
Ended up doing the opposite in many ways. It boosted Hezbollah's prestige across the Arab world as the group that stood up to Israel. It exposed the limits of Israeli military power against a determined guerrilla force, and by extension, the limits of the whole containment strategy against Iran.
And the regional impact. How did Arab governments react?
It was awkward for them. Initially, pro-Western Arab governments like Egypt and Saudi Arabia condemned Hezbollah's actions that sparked the war. But as popular Arab support for Hezbollah surged, these governments had to backtrack. It highlighted their own weakness, their limited influence with the Bush administration, and paradoxically, it further strengthened Iran's hand in the region.
So looking back at this incredibly complex, often secret, frequently contradictory history, what are the big takeaways? Why is Iran so often just labeled irrational?
Well, the book argues that label often comes from our own flawed assumptions. We, or rather, policymakers, expected regional dynamics to work a certain way. For example, the assumption that Iran, being non-Arab, would always align with Israel against the
Like
Arabs.
in the Shah's time.
Exactly.
Mhm.
So when Iran's actions after the revolution didn't fit that neat box, instead of questioning the original assumption, the behavior itself was dismissed as temporary or illogical or just plain irrational.
So it wasn't necessarily that Iran lacked its own strategic logic, but that its logic didn't fit our expected patterns.
Precisely. And the cost of sticking to those flawed assumptions and the policies based on them has been huge. Strategies like dual containment or hoping for regime change haven't just failed to achieve their goals. They've often backfired, making Iran feel more threatened, arguably stronger in some ways, and certainly more antagonistic.
Okay, so if containment and regime change are failed strategies, what's the alternative path? The book talks about regional integration, collective security. What does that look like?
It means moving away from trying to indefinitely isolate or contain Iran. It means recognizing reality. Iran is a major regional power, and you probably can't exclude it forever.
So accommodate rather than contain.
Yes, but accommodation doesn't mean surrender. It means trying to integrate Iran into the regional and global political and economic structures. The idea is that integration could be a force for moderation and stability, giving Iran a stake in the system rather than only incentives to disrupt it.
And this would require compromises on both sides, like that 2003 grand bargain offer.
Exactly like that. It means finding ways to address Iran's legitimate security concerns. They do feel vulnerable too, but in return for major changes in Iranian policy. Things like accepting U.S. global leadership, ending support for militant proxies, full nuclear transparency.
And critically, ending hostilities towards Israel, accepting a two-state solution.
That would have to be the cornerstone. A verifiable end to the conflict with Israel based on the two-state principle.
It's striking that even some prominent Israelis, like the former foreign minister Shlomo Berameh, have argued for something like this kind of détente. What's his reasoning?
Ben-Ami and others like him argue that Iran's primary driver isn't some irrational, purely ideological obsession with destroying Israel. It's driven more by a desire for regional power, status, and security, like most nations.
So see Iran as a rational actor with ambitions, not just a rogue state.
Yes. And Ben-Ami warned that constantly exaggerating the Iranian threat, whether to scare Arabs into peace with Israel or to rally domestic support, is ultimately counterproductive and damaging to finding real solutions. Acknowledging Iran's strategic goals might actually open doors for negotiation that ideological fixation closes.
So the path forward for a more stable Middle East, according to this analysis, requires Iran to accept the two-state reality and moderate its regional actions.
Correct. Significant changes are needed from Tehran.
But it also requires something from Israel.
Yes. It suggests Israel needs to adjust its heavily militarized approach, its doctrine that often seems to put it on an inevitable collision course with Tehran. The history we've discussed shows that purely military solutions or containment haven't worked, and have often made things worse. A shift towards diplomacy and mutual accommodation might be necessary.
We have certainly navigated a tangled, secret history today, uncovering how cold, hard strategic interests so often pushed public rhetoric aside. The way alliances shifted, dissolved, and reformed between Israel, Iran, and the U.S. is just, well, it's far more complex than the simple enemies forever narrative we usually hear.
It absolutely is. The pragmatism, the secret deals, the double games, they reveal so much.
So, what does this all mean for you listening right now as you look at today's headlines coming out of the Middle East? Here's something to think about.
Okay.
If both sides in this decades-long, often hidden, treacherous alliance have repeatedly shown they're willing to bend ideology, to make deals, to pursue pragmatic national interests when it suits them, what does that truly tell you about the nature of their conflicts today? And maybe more importantly, what might it suggest about the potential pathways to peace, pathways built on interest, rather than ideology that might still be out there waiting to be explored?